When it comes to sleep, my 3 children couldn't be any more different, and when I saw that Channel Mum was talking about sleep and sleep tips this month, I knew it was one that I wanted to get involved with. So today I'm going to talk to you about my experiences with my 3 children and share with you my top tips for getting 3 kids to go to sleep. It was always really important to me to make sure that my husband and I had some time just for the 2 of us in the evening to chat and unwind and just be grown-ups for an hour or so before we go to bed. And all you mums will know that is easier said than done, but it was something that I was keen to try and achieve if at all possible. So that was my goal before having children. Little did I know how tricky that would be. However, I think we've kind of got there each time. I think it just took different approaches for each baby. My first baby came along and he was not a good sleeper, to put it mildly. He fell into that awful trap of my husband would take him out in the car, in his car seat to get him off to sleep, and then we'd try to desperately transfer him from the car to the house and not wake him up. Most of the time he would wake up. We did all the things that you probably shouldn't do out of pure desperation to get him to go to sleep. He got there in his own time. I can't say that there's any one thing that we did to nail sleep with Dylan, unfortunately. I just think it was one of those things. He was my first baby, I was stressed, he was probably stressed because I was stressed, and eventually we found our way and he started to sleep through. To this day, Dylan is definitely my worst sleeper of the 3. He's 10 now and he's a monkey. No matter what time he goes to sleep, he could be, say we're on holiday and he doesn't go to sleep until midnight for some reason, he will still wake up at 6 o'clock the next morning. His body clock just wakes him up really, really early. I think I probably count on one hand the number of times he slept past 7. And at least now he's that bit older, he will go and entertain himself. Like when he wakes up, he will go and turn on the TV or grab an iPad or something and entertain himself until his sister wakes up. Although on occasion he will go and wake up his sister, and yeah, that's another story. On the subject of his sister, my daughter Marion was my second baby, and she, from day one, adored sleep. As a very young toddler, she used to actually try and climb into her own cot. She was so desperate to go to sleep. I never had any problems getting her to go off to sleep. She slept through really early on. She sleeps in, well, I say sleeps in, she's still quite an early waker. She probably wakes about 7:30, but compared to Dylan, she sleeps in the morning and she just loves her sleep. And it just goes to show, I don't think I did anything particularly differently with Marion than I did with Dylan. Perhaps I was slightly less stressed because she was my second and less worked up about the whole sleep thing. But when she came along, I was expecting the worst. I thought, oh God, here we go again, it's going to be really difficult. But she was just a dream when it came to sleep, and she still is. My third baby, again, he likes sleep. He probably wasn't quite as willing to go to bed as Marion, but we had a slightly different approach with Aidan. He's our third baby, and obviously by the time you get to number 3, you are a lot more relaxed with your routines and how you like to do things, and they just kind of come along and slot into what is already a really busy, chaotic household with lots of different things going on. So when he was born, we did what we needed to do to kind of make things work for us. We actually fell into what could have turned out to be a disastrous habit, and when he was very little, we used to keep him downstairs with us because I was so paranoid about him making noises and keeping my elder 2 children awake at night when I wanted them to go to sleep. So I was breastfeeding him, as I did with the other 2, so I would feed him downstairs and then we'd keep him with us for a little while until I knew that they'd gone to sleep. Oftentimes that meant that we had the Moses basket downstairs next to the sofa, and he'd fall asleep on me and I'd pop him in there, and then I would try and carry him up to bed while he was asleep in there, or I'd pick him up and carry him up and put him in his cot next to the bed. Now that worked fine for us at the time. It could have meant that we'd find it really difficult to get him to settle on his own, but it wasn't too bad. Although I can remember on more than one occasion trying to commando roll across the creaky floorboards to go downstairs, and hopefully he wouldn't notice that I'd left the room, or I would be talking to him or singing to him and I'd sort of move literally inch by inch a little bit closer to the door so he could still see me, and then hopefully when he wasn't quite looking I could just make the last kind of dash out the room, and that worked-ish for a while, although oftentimes a floorboard would creak and he'd scream and I'd have to go back and get him again. So over the years and 3 babies later, I've kind of gathered together some tips that I tried to stick to, especially when Aidan came along and I was a bit more experienced when it came to the whole baby thing. So I thought I would share those tips with you. The first one is to be consistent. All kids are going to try and push their luck when it comes to bedtime, especially as they get a little bit older and they can communicate and they can come up with excuses and be cheeky and take the mickey a little bit. Right from early on, when they were able to get in and out of their own beds, my husband and I agreed that it might take us a while to get there, but it was worth being consistent and just reinforcing the message that it's not okay to keep getting in and out of bed. It's bedtime, you go to bed and that's where you stay and you fall asleep. But like the whole super nanny advice as well, we would just be really consistent, take them back up to bed, try not to communicate too much or say too much, and put them back into bed, say goodnight and leave the room. It does take time and patience and it doesn't happen overnight, but eventually they all got the message that once they're in bed, they're supposed to stay there and go to sleep, and we see them again in the morning. The next tip kind of follows on from that, and it's to make sure that they are well aware before bedtime that if they want a drink or to go for a wee or to get a particular book or a particular toy, that they need to do it before they get into bed and mummy and daddy leave the room. Obviously, if they need the toilet, nobody's going to yell at them if they have to get out of bed to go to the loo, but I just try and encourage them to do it before they are all in their beds. Another reason for that is that I find that if one of them gets up to go for a drink of water or to go to the toilet, then all 3 of them want to get up and go to the toilet or have a drink, and it just makes it easier for everyone if they do it all before bedtime. My third tip is to understand how their body clocks work. As I said earlier, all 3 of my children were very different when it comes to sleep, and there's no point in me trying to enforce. With Dylan, I've given up, believe me, after 10 years. He's not going to sleep in past about 6 o'clock, and I spent a lot of time trying to convince him to, he has a clock next to his bed, so I spent a lot of time trying to convince him to stay in bed until 7, and he wasn't allowed to get up before 7. He could read a book in his bed, but he's just wide awake and he is a fidgeter anyway. So for Dylan, telling him he's got to stay in bed for an hour and not get up is almost impossible. So I've just kind of accepted that most mornings he will get up and go and find some way to entertain himself before everyone else wakes up, and it's not ideal, and sometimes it means I'm up earlier than I might have wanted to be. Other times he is a stealthy ninja and he manages to sneak an iPad from somewhere or a book or whatever. My fourth tip is to minimise the daddy effect. Now this one is really difficult and I have yet to master it, but what I mean on a sort of broader scale is to try and keep the sort of excitement levels lower for the hour before bedtime. Now usually if my husband's working till quite late, he'll come home and then he plays with them and tickles them and winds them up, and then they are like wired to the moon, and getting them to go straight to sleep is an absolute disaster. That tip also goes for things like electronics and iPads and any games that kind of wind them up. I try to keep those to a minimum before, about an hour before bedtime. The last hour before bed usually consists of a bath and a story, or the older children read themselves. So it is kind of a wind down time anyway, but on some occasions my husband will come home and just decide that that might be a good time to have a Nerf battle or a tickle fight or whatever craziness he likes to bring home with him. So you can't avoid that sometimes. I wouldn't want to spoil their fun, but I am very aware that the more wound up they get just before bed, they are not going to go to sleep. And then of course you can't blame them if they are more unsettled and getting up and down out of bed because the husband wound them up. His fault. My final tip, and one that I always try to do, especially on the weekend when they might be allowed up a little bit later, is to give them a warning. There is nothing worse, and my husband is really guilty of this. He does this all the time and it drives me mad. They might be in the middle of something like playing a game or making something or drawing something or watching a movie, and he'll say, bedtime, that's it, everybody pack everything away, out of nowhere, and then they all get really upset and everybody starts shouting and getting all flustered. That is just not going to help with a smooth, stress-free bedtime. It's just a disaster. So I keep saying to him, and I always do this myself, I say it's a 5-minute warning, but it's usually about a quarter of an hour, but I say to them, you've got 5 minutes before bed, finish whatever you're doing, I'll be back up in a minute, or I'll be in a minute to get you in the bath. It just gives them a warning. I think it's only fair. They might be in the middle of something, especially now they're that bit older, and I don't want to sort of swoop in and spoil their fun and not give them any chance to finish off what they might be doing. So I always give them a warning, let them know, and give them a sort of 5, 10, 15 minutes before it's time to get in the bath or into their pyjamas and into bed. So those are my tips for getting my 3 monkeys to sleep. I'd love to know yours. If you've got any to share, please leave them in the comments below and like this video if you enjoyed it. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please click the button below. It would absolutely make my day, and I'll see you in my next video.